Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, out here on my bench. As you can see, I've got a number of things set up in preparation for feeding some worm bins. It's a nice assortment of varied vegetable scraps, all frozen and hopefully not frozen so tight together that I won't be able to chip it apart. It seems pretty granular and pretty, like it doesn't seem to have like globs of ice floating around it. So hopefully I can manage to break this into 4 even portions pretty easily. 4 even portions have also been set up here of napkins, some really nice fancy ornate napkins. Slightly soiled, but the worms won't mind. I always feel like it's a shame to leave stuff like this out on the table and let it go to the trash when I could just scoop it up and eventually just give it to the worms and make castings out of it. So these are all napkins, and even over there, perhaps not so fancy, just some soiled paper towels and napkins to go as well. The systems we're feeding today are all European night crawlers, and at this time, my European night crawlers are actually the oldest of my active composting systems. These are 310 days old. Everything older is already in the process of horizontal migration, attempts at getting the worms out so we can harvest their castings. Now, besides these two European night crawler bins, I've also got a couple down on the floor. The two older ones are actually the same age, 310 days of age. So a little bit over 300 days of age. The ones down there are under 200 days of age. 190 something and whatever the age of the younger one. Curious to see how the younger one is doing. The youngest of them all has this compostable bag in it that we've been tracking the progress of. So we're going to get these up on the bench and we're going to get them fed. So let's get to work. Something I've been doing lately is what you see me doing here again today is running these sister bins or buddy bins or twin bins side by side. I only just started doing it lately. I sort of did it as a little bit of a test over here in the European Nightcrawler systems, but it has since sort of spread to become the manner in which I feed all my buddied up, paired up systems for the most part. And I kind of like it, you know. One interesting benefit that I found to it already was that, number one, I've talked about a few times, which is how I can sort of go through sort of a simulation of what it would be like if I was running a system that's actually twice the size as one of my normal bins here. So if I allow my imagination to sort of, make this middle piece here disappear, the space between the two actual physical containers, then I can sort of pretend that I'm actually working in a fairly large single system. And I guess the other benefit is that as I'm working, I can really, just with my hands, I could sense differences in moisture and consistency or whatever, which I think might also provide some benefits in terms of, trying to spot anything that could cause things to go a little bit off kilter and out of balance. Because, systems like these two that have been running parallel to one another their entire lives, all 310 days, launched on the same day, fed the same day each time, fed with the same stuff in the same quantities. We might even have populations that are identical, or at least estimated populations. Although in this case, I believe with these two older European nightcrawler systems, I think there was some sort of a rationale for loading up one of the systems with one final round of worms that came from somewhere. And rather than attempting to split that last little batch of worms up, I believe one of the systems in this case was the beneficiary of a few extra worms, maybe a couple hundred more worms. The stuff out here is pretty much all castings, kind of makes you wonder why the worms like hanging out there. Although, everyone, no, not everyone, but most people know that you can continuously observe worms reusing their, their manure as a food source. So I think the number of times worms can actually re-ingest their castings is like up to 6 or 7 times from what I've heard. And I guess the main reason for that is that there's just so much nutritional value remaining in what comes out on the first round that it can get reused that way numerous times. Over here it seems like we might have dug a little bit deeper into the center. I can already see signs of some of the shredded paper that was used as bedding around the feeding area last time, which was down the middle. And that kind of reminds me now, as we were peeling those newspaper coverings off the top, they were so fragile, I was just taking a little bit of extra care to make sure that they don't rip, so I could possibly reuse them as coverings maybe one more time, probably one last time at this point. And I failed to see if I can spot what kind of shape the feeding zone indicators are in, because a lot of times to mark where we last fed, in the case of these bins we were feeding right down the center, we marked that with a couple of coffee filters. But I got a feeling that those coffee filters have pretty much become embedded with those top covering newspapers that we peeled off in the beginning, so I'm not going to be trying to make any sort of an attempt to dislodge those pieces of paper from one another. Trying that would probably result in a bunch of torn paper. But I am going to try to see if I can reuse those top coverings one last time as top coverings here, and I think by the next time we see them we'll probably be just recycling them or reusing them in a somewhat more noble fashion, taking them away from doing a really mundane task of just being a top covering and turning into worm food, basically becoming the bedding to go under their next feeding. But for this time they're going to remain in their current station. Alright, I think the time has come to unearth the feeding area to see how they're doing with their last meal, which at this point was 10 days ago. And I'm really impressed because I can't really discern anything that I'm going through here as being the remains of that last feeding, except maybe a little bit of shredded paper and cardboard here or there. Some of the stuff I bumped into though along the way, I definitely encountered stuff that would go back to feedings gone by in the past, stuff like corn cobs and banana peel stems and stuff like that. Like this right here, for example, is a piece of corn cob. Fairly fragile. This end of it is already just sort of chipping away as I bump into it with my finger, and I can see worms hanging out down inside of it as well. So let's see how the feeding zone in this one is coming along. Both systems have a good number of worms in them. Even on the outer edges, when I was inspecting that in the beginning, I saw good numbers of worms in the material throughout. And, not too surprisingly, it's same story down here where we last fed. Good number of worms still hanging out, even though, from what I could tell, the food that they were given last time is pretty much all gone. Alright, I think we've gotten to the point where we can squeeze in today's portion, hopefully. I guess it's kind of good that we've got some napkins to lay down beneath the frozen foods because it's going in frozen. And this way any worms that might still be nearby are going to be insulated from that freezing cold. Oops, what was that? Oh, whatever. Makes no difference. I think the time has come to get on with giving these little guys their portion so we can continue and get the other system fed as well. So yeah, I mean, if I don't pay attention, these napkins just start piling up, and that's exactly where I was with this. I had a number of them just sitting here on my bench, and then I remembered I had some stacked up over in the other room, and I got those in here as well. And I was actually a little bit surprised to see just how many of these napkins have accumulated over here over time. I mean, if you were to come to dinner here at my house, you'd get a simple dollar store napkin. But these napkins are actually from my mom's house, so you can see that they're all nice, fancy, ornate, colorful, thick, large napkins. I believe these come from IKEA, for anyone who's interested. So, that looks to me like a pretty good foundation into which we can drop today's feeding. I think the trick here is going to be dislodging a fair amount from the pile to give to these two systems. So I'm going to see if I can at first just chip the entire pile in half if I can. Sort of like that, I think. And that'll leave hopefully enough to feed the other two bins. It seems like it is. You can see some of it has already landed over here in ENC bin number 1. This is the one that you saw earlier with the number 1 label on it. This one over here is the one that you saw earlier with the label number 2 on it. So yeah, this stuff to me looks like the materials that would have been used in a soup. You can see a lot of peeling of carrots goes into the preparation of a soup. Well, not only carrots, other things too. So I think we've done a fair job distributing this portion equally between the two systems. I believe all we've got left to do now is cover up. Let's not forget we've also got some of these not so fancy napkins that need to go too, so we'll get them in here as well. And we can see how successful we'll be reusing those old top covering newspapers to drape out across the top. I mean, now it's starting to warm up in my region, and I expect that the heat in my house is going to pretty much go dormant up until autumn. And with that being the case, the drying effects of my forced hot air heating system will no longer be a variable in managing the moisture level of my worm bins, because believe it or not, I guess depending on how you manage your systems, but if your worm bins are exposed to the air to some degree, then they'll be subject to the potential drying effects of the air. Sometimes when the humidity is high and the windows are open, then the high humidity in the house allows for the preservation of the moisture in my worm bins much more easily than, say, in the winter time when the heat's running non-stop, drying the air out almost continuously. I was just trying to see if I could spot the feeding zone indicator from last time. At best, it looked like it might have just been a discoloration on the back side of this piece of newspaper, and I was not going to try to peel it off. This one is the one I'm questioning in terms of how well we're going to be able to open it up and spread it back out as a top covering. It doesn't matter, regardless of how well it goes down. It is what it is, and that's all they're getting, but I got a feeling the next time it'll be more or less gone. And if not, then we'll just make it go down into the feeding area to get used as supplemental bedding. So these systems are doing quite nicely, humming along. So I think we'll just return these plastic coverings to hang on to the existing moisture in the systems, and as time goes on, I do believe I'll be able to transition over from using these plastics to prevent against evaporation, maybe replace them with cardboard. But for now, we're going to stick with what we got. Let's go get the other bins and get them fed next. So you can tell right away, my worm bins are not all the same. So like in this case, I figured maybe I would put some shade paper on top of this translucent plastic to make it a little bit darker and cozier for them to come out to the surface, even if there's maybe bright lights coming down and shining through, especially in the case of this one, this fairly translucent plastic bag. And let's see, try to move these things out of our way without making a huge mess. There is a good bit of stuff that adheres to the plastic bag, and that's because of the moisture recirculating beneath the plastic bag, collecting on the bag, and the worms really enjoying that, coming up to partake in it. You can see it was a few, not last time. Last time we just reused what was out here, but a couple feedings ago we came in here with just leaves from outside to blanket all 4 of these systems with a nice coating of leaves. Last time we had so many out here still, we just pushed them aside and we kind of just sort of reused what was out here still, since it was in good shape. Even now, some of these leaves are in still pretty decent shape. So I'm definitely starting to see a good bit of springtail activity down here in this system. So I saw it in here too, but in here it looks like maybe it's even a little bit more severe. I do have one system where I've been trying to deal with the presence of the springtails in the hopes that I could reduce their numbers in time. So I'm in the process of trying to dry things out over in that other system where I've got the outbreak going on. Hopefully we don't start seeing that in all my systems. So now this is what I mentioned earlier. It's a bag that appears to be a plastic bag. What it's really made out of, I don't know, but it's labeled as compostable, and if you hold it up you can see there's clear holes developing in it. Holes that we'd already observed last time. And I'm just curious if they've grown in size. There are always a few worms hanging out on it, working the thing, presumably working it. So I'm just curious to see what becomes of it. It definitely seems like it's deteriorating. I don't know if it's from my rough handling or if it's just based on it being in here with the worms. Sometimes I don't know if compostable means it needs to be in a hot composting environment where the heat plays a big part in the breakdown process, or will it possibly break down in this sort of a cool composting worm bin environment? I guess we'll see over time. At this point I don't even know how long it's been in here. A lot of times I come down here prepared with all kinds of facts and figures about the systems we're preparing to check in on, and today I did not come down prepared with that. I did look through my spreadsheet briefly just to refresh my memory on basic worm bin ages. There's only about 3 weeks difference in age when it comes to these two systems, so they're both approaching 300 days of age. I believe this bin right here that I'm in right now, the older of the two, is the one that's now only a few days away from reaching 300 days in service. Or did I say 300? 200, I'm sorry. The other systems are now over 300 days of age. These two are now still just approaching day 200, not 300. My mistake. Okay. This might be leftovers from the last feeding, some paper bits. But that's okay. I don't mind finding leftovers. That's the stuff that they can just get right back to eating right away. A lot of times when I put stuff into my worm bins, a lot of times I just don't even expect to see much action on that stuff right away. Certain things do take a little bit of time before the microbiology within the bin breaks things down to the point where the worms can actually dive in and start enjoying it. Not everything's like that. Certain things the worms can go for immediately if it's, you know, some sort of a really delicious, moist, sweet material. The worms can just start nibbling right away at it, like, you know, melon or something like that. Other things take a little bit of time before the worms can start to approach it. So that's a pretty good amount of bedding, if you ask me. At first I was questioning if it was going to be sufficient, but once I see it in here, I can definitely tell that it's plenty. Now, I guess one thing I really wanted to do, because I think last time we forgot to position our compostable bag near the foods, and it just sort of ended up as an afterthought being placed over the feeding area. I really wanted to take care to kind of encircle the compostable bag with all the foods that we're giving them today, so that when they, you know, when they come over to nibble on the foods, they'll just be right there in contact with the bag, hopefully triggering a little additional wear and action on the bag. So it will be kind of nice to see that thing really vanish in the worm bin. If it just sits in there for months and months with those couple holes in there, I'll assume that the holes were accidentally caused by me and that it's not compostable. But yeah, at the moment I'm still kind of, you know, keeping the faith and hoping that we do actually over some time begin to see some activity and breakdown of that compostable bag. I always feel like I'm about to say plastic bag, and I feel like I have to bite my tongue and not call it a plastic bag since I can't really back that up. I can't tell you what it's made out of. So I just bumped into a number of older things here. Here's the stem of a a pumpkin, here's a piece of corn cob, here's another stem of pumpkin. Things that are just sort of floating around down here within the bin. We'll see if we can get these things right back down where the activity is going to be kicking in soon to come after that delicious feeding we just gave them. And I think we're more or less done. I don't know if we should take the time. Maybe we could just take a quick peek, see how things in these outskirts look. I also kind of treat the check-in as an opportunity to air things out, but I think at this point I'm really gauging moisture levels. And it does seem like moisture in here is possibly a little bit beyond where it needs to be, a little bit more damp than is necessary. Kind of makes me feel like I should possibly come back here after the fact, maybe even on the other system too, and find replacements for these plastic coverings. Perhaps some cardboard would still offer some decent protection against evaporation to some degree, but allow perhaps a little bit more moisture from these systems to leave and allow for a little bit of drying, see a little bit more crumbliness. And maybe even a little drying would help reduce the number of springtails I'm observing over here. Alright, well, let's just really quickly get this side of it tilled up and then we'll be finished. I really don't believe that this tilling helps too much in the drying, but if nothing else it at least permits aeration. You know, get some air down in there, make sure none of these sections where the material's getting wet and clumpy, that it has the, you know, potential to turn anaerobic, which means, you know, oxygen supply gets used up and then there's no oxygen, and you know, certain things can continue to live in an oxygen-free environment, certain types of bacteria and stuff, but as soon as that starts happening in your worm bins, you know, because it stinks and you generally don't want that, you know, because if there's no oxygen in the material, the worms can't be there. They breathe through their skin, extract the oxygen they need from the moisture that they come in contact with, and even though it might seem moist, if it's free of oxygen, it's not good for the worms. It's useless to them. They'll have to find some material that's actually such that they can utilize it to breathe. So really quick before we cover things up here, I was just checking to see if I've got any worms on this torn glove of mine. This glove's going straight in the trash, and I'll have a fun time cleaning it out under my nails. All right, everyone, that's it for our check-in with all my European nightcrawler bins. Giving them their feeding here. Let's get this little wormy back where he belongs, little baby. So I've got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away. I'm not going to waste your time with that. Before I go though, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.